Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The sun had barely risen, casting an eerie orange glow over the village. The morning mist still clung to the ground, creeping like a shroud through the tall grass. In the distance, two figures stood motionless on the hill, framed by the rising sun behind them. Their silhouettes seemed to stretch unnaturally tall and thin against the sky, as though they were more than human. The villagers watched from behind closed windows, their hearts racing with dread. The twins had been a mystery for years, and no one in the village could explain why they had come or where they had come from. They arrived in the dead of night, just a few months after a strange storm had hit the village. The storm had left the land barren, with crops dying and animals disappearing. Some believed it was the storm that had driven the twins to this place, while others whispered that the twins themselves had brought it with them. No one dared to approach them, not anymore. Even the bravest men had retreated into their homes when they saw the twins walking down the narrow village streets, their faces pale and unreadable. At first, there were rumors. The twins were from a faraway land, they said. They had magical powers, others whispered. But over time, the rumors turned into something far darker. They were cursed. They were evil. And then, one by one, strange things started happening. It began with the crops. Every year, the harvest grew smaller, despite the villagers' best efforts. The soil seemed to lose its fertility. The once thriving orchards that surrounded the village began to wither. Then, the livestock started disappearing. At first, it was just a few chickens, then a couple of goats. But soon, even cows and horses were vanishing without a trace. The villagers would find their pens empty, the doors to their barns wide open, but no sign of struggle, no sign of what had happened. The most disturbing event, though, had occurred just a few weeks earlier when the village doctor had died under mysterious circumstances. Dr. Jacobs had been a kind, dedicated man, but after a visit to the twins' house, he had fallen ill almost immediately. The doctors and healers from the neighboring villages had come to examine him, but no one could figure out what was wrong. The fever that overtook him was unlike anything they had seen before. It raged for days, and his body twisted in unnatural ways, as if his very soul was being twisted and pulled apart. He had died in the night, his last words a cryptic warning, "It's them." The twins. No one could forget the look of sheer terror in his eyes as he spoke those words. The village was on edge now, more than ever. Some began to say that the twins were cursed, others that they were something far worse. Some even spoke of darker things, possession, voodoo, witchcraft. But what exactly they were, no one knew. And then came the night of the storm. It wasn't like any storm the village had ever seen before. The wind howled through the trees like a wounded animal, and the rain came in sheets, lashing against every surface. The sky was alive with the fury of thunder and lightning, the air thick with electricity. The villagers huddled inside their homes, shutters tightly closed, praying for the storm to pass. But that night, a scream pierced the storm, cutting through the noise like a knife. It came from the twins' house. The scream was frantic, raw, and desperate. It sent a shiver down the spine of anyone who heard it, and without thinking, a few villagers rushed to the window to look out. The house where the twins lived was at the edge of the village, isolated and foreboding. The windows were dark, and the house seemed to sway with the storm, its silhouette barely visible against the torrential rain. For a moment, everything went silent. The storm still raged, but the village seemed to hold its breath. Everyone waited, unsure of what to do. Some thought it was just the wind, others weren't so sure. Then, the woman came. She stumbled into the village square, soaked to the bone, her clothes torn and ragged. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She looked like she had seen something no one should ever see. "Please. You have to help me," she gasped, her voice trembling. The villagers gathered around her, but no one dared to approach too closely. They had all heard the stories of the twins and the strange happenings surrounding them. Some had even seen the twins standing in the shadows, watching them. But none had dared to confront them directly. "Please. I'm begging you." The woman fell to her knees, her hands shaking. They're not human. They're not, like us. The crowd fell silent. What are you talking about? One man asked, his voice low and cautious. I went to their house, the woman said, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I tried to talk to them. I thought I could. She stopped, her face contorting with fear as she looked back toward the horizon. They did something. Something horrible. I saw it with my own eyes, but I can't explain it. The villagers stared at her, but no one moved. The atmosphere was thick with unease. They're not who they say they are, she continued, her voice trembling. You have to believe me. They've done something to this village. Something terrible. Before anyone could respond, she collapsed into the dirt, unconscious, her body limp. The village stood frozen in shock, the storm continuing to rage around them. No one moved to help her, for fear of what the twins might do next. The last words she had spoken hung in the air, thick with dread. The twins. They had done something. But what? The next few hours were a blur. The woman was carried into one of the nearby homes, where the villagers tried to revive her, but she remained unconscious, her body trembling with fever. No one had the courage to speak of what she had said, no one knew what to believe. But something had changed that night. The fear that had already gripped the village tightened its hold. People began locking their doors earlier in the evening. Children were kept inside, away from the streets. And the twins, who had once only been a source of whispered rumors, were now the center of everyone's darkest thoughts. What had they done? What were they capable of? The truth seemed to slip through their fingers like sand. The storm lasted well into the night, but by morning, the village had descended into an uneasy calm. The woman who had collapsed in the square was still unconscious, her fever burning hotter than any of the villagers had ever seen. She muttered incoherently in her sleep, speaking of dark things, of shadows, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The whispers, the villagers said, were the sound of the twins calling. After the woman had been taken inside, no one dared to leave their homes. The sun had risen, but it brought no warmth to the land. The air felt cold, heavy with dread, as though the storm had brought something more than just rain. It had brought a curse. The twins remained in their house on the hill, standing in silence like two unmoving statues. Their windows were dark, their door never opened. Yet, it was impossible to shake the feeling that they were watching, always watching. Villagers whispered about the storm, about the woman's warning, but no one knew what to do. Everyone was afraid to venture outside, afraid to approach the house on the hill. And still, the fear lingered in every corner of the village. As the days passed, things only seemed to grow worse. The crops in the fields continued to wither. No matter what the villagers did, the soil refused to give them life. The orchards that once flourished now stood barren, the trees twisted and dead, their limbs gnarled and lifeless. Even the river, which had always flowed steadily and strong, began to shrink, as though the earth itself was losing its will to live. The animals continued to vanish, one by one. At first, it had been easy to dismiss the disappearances as nothing more than wild animals taking them in the night. But as the weeks went by, it became clear that something far more sinister was at work. Sheep were found in the middle of the fields, their bodies drained of life as if some unseen force had sucked the very essence from them. Cows were found dead, their eyes wide open in terror, as though they had seen something that had frightened them beyond measure. But what was even more disturbing than the animals was the change in the people. The village had always been a close-knit community, where everyone knew everyone else's business, and where trust was paramount. But now, trust had begun to erode. The villagers grew suspicious of one another. They would look over their shoulders in fear, jump at sudden noises, and whisper in hushed tones whenever they passed each other on the street. The village had become a place where even the smallest glance seemed loaded with hidden meaning. The children no longer played outside. They were kept inside, away from the shadows, away from the strange pull that seemed to come from the hill where the twins lived. The elders spoke in low voices, recalling old legends, old tales of things that had happened long ago. They warned the younger generations that there were forces in the world, forces older than time, that could not be explained, forces that defied reason. And some of them wondered aloud if the twins were not part of that force. But still, the twins said nothing. They remained silent in their house, and every time someone tried to approach them, they were met with an unsettling stillness. The villagers began to wonder if the twins were even alive at all. The breaking point came one afternoon when a man named Samuel, one of the village's strongest and most respected farmers, decided he had had enough. He was tired of living in fear, tired of seeing his crops fail and his livestock die. He was a man of action, and he believed that the twins had to be confronted. "We cannot live like this," Samuel said one evening, speaking to a small group of men gathered in his home. His face was hard, his jaw clenched in frustration. "If we don't do something about this, we'll all be destroyed. It's them, the twins. We need to get answers." The other men exchanged nervous glances, but Samuel's words struck a chord with them. They had been living in silence for too long. They had been waiting for something to happen, but now it seemed clear that waiting was no longer an option. They needed to take action. "I agree," said Isaac, another farmer in the village. "We need to confront them. Find out what they're doing to us. If they're behind this curse, we need to stop them." But not everyone was so sure. Old Thomas, a man whose age had given him a wealth of experience, shook his head. "You don't understand," Thomas said in a low, gravelly voice. "The twins are not what you think they are. You cannot just confront them. I've seen things. Things that can't be explained." But Samuel was determined. "We can't live in fear anymore. I'm going to their house. I'm going to find out what's going on, and I'm bringing back answers." The others hesitated, but eventually, they agreed. It was a decision that would change everything. As Samuel and the group of men made their way toward the twins' house on the hill, the tension in the village seemed to rise. It felt like the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The wind had picked up again, howling through the trees and sending a chill through the air. The storm clouds from the night before had disappeared, but the sense of dread had not. When they reached the foot of the hill, the men paused. The house loomed in the distance, dark and silent, like a watchful predator waiting for its prey. It was a small, old building, with ivy creeping up its stone walls and the windows blacked out with heavy curtains. There were no signs of life, no movement, nothing to indicate that anyone was inside. Yet, the men could feel it, the weight of something unseen, something watching them. Samuel took a deep breath and stepped forward. "We go in. No turning back." The others nodded, though none of them looked particularly eager. Slowly, they made their way up the hill, the grass crunching underfoot. As they neared the house, the silence grew more oppressive. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to something they weren't ready for. The door to the house was old and weathered, but it creaked open easily when Samuel turned the handle. Inside, the air was thick and musty, filled with the scent of dust and decay. There was no sound, no movement. The house was as still as death itself. Samuel stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The other men followed him, each of them feeling a growing sense of unease. They searched the house, room by room, but found nothing. It was as though the twins had vanished, leaving only their empty, darkened home behind. But then, as they reached the last room, a strange noise echoed from the corner. It was soft at first, but it grew louder, like the sound of something breathing. The men froze, staring into the darkness. The air seemed to grow colder, and the very walls of the house seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. And then, the twins appeared. Their faces were pale, their eyes dark as if the light had been sucked out of them. They stood in the doorway, watching the men with cold, unreadable expressions. They had not moved, had not made a sound, yet there they were. For a moment, no one spoke. The twins simply watched, their gaze penetrating, as if they could see into the very souls of the men standing before them. Finally, one of the men, a younger farmer named Elias, couldn't take it any longer. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this to us?" The twins didn't answer. Instead, they stepped aside, as if to invite the men further into the house. Reluctantly, Samuel and the others stepped forward, their fear growing with each passing moment. And that's when it happened. The door slammed shut behind them, trapping them in darkness. The door slammed shut with an earth-shaking thud, sending a jolt of fear through the men standing inside the house. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the very walls of the house were closing in on them. They turned, looking for a way out, but the door was already sealed tight, and no other windows opened. The house had become their prison. Samuel's heart raced as he gripped his shovel, the only tool they had brought with them. The others fumbled for their lanterns, their hands trembling in the dark. A sense of cold dread crept over them, each man afraid to speak, afraid to draw attention to themselves. Something about the stillness of the house felt wrong. It was unnatural, as though the air itself was charged with an energy they couldn't comprehend. The twins stood at the far end of the room, silent as statues, watching them with those dark, unreadable eyes. There was no warmth, no kindness in their gaze. They were like shadows, distant and untouchable. "What do you want from us?" Samuel's voice cracked as he took a step forward. His grip on the shovel tightened, but he wasn't sure whether it was a weapon or a lifeline. The twins did not respond. Instead, they moved slowly, deliberately, their movements almost too smooth, too fluid. They advanced toward the group, and with each step they took, the air seemed to grow colder, the darkness deeper. The shadows around them stretched unnaturally, as though they were alive, swirling in the corners of the room, suffocating the light. A chill ran down Samuel's spine as the twins stopped just a few feet away, their faces still as blank as ever. It was as if they were studying him, trying to understand him, and it made his skin crawl. "Who are you?" Samuel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Finally, the twins spoke, but their words were not what he expected. Their voices were calm, almost gentle, but there was something terrifying in their tone. "You seek answers," one of the twins said, its voice a strange, melodic sound, like a lullaby sung in the dead of night. "We know what you fear," the other twin continued, its voice sending a cold shiver through Samuel. "We know what you have lost." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. What did they mean by that? What did they know? "What do you want from us?" Elias, the youngest of the group, asked, his voice cracking with fear. He was standing at the back, his hands shaking at his sides. The twins turned to him, their eyes locking onto his. There was a strange, almost hypnotic pull in their gaze, as if they could see deep inside his soul. "You seek answers," one twin repeated. "But the truth is not what you think." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Samuel could feel the weight of them pressing down on him. Something wasn't right. Something was terribly wrong. "Enough!" Samuel finally shouted. "We're not here for riddles. We need answers. The village is dying. The crops are failing. Our animals are disappearing. People are getting sick. And we know it's because of you. You're the ones causing this." The twins exchanged a brief, knowing glance. Then, without a word, they began to move again, circling around the men like two ghostly shadows. Their movements were unsettling, too graceful, too controlled. It was as though they were something more than human. "You don't understand," one twin said, its voice distant. "This has already begun. It cannot be stopped." "What are you talking about?" Isaac demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "This is our home. Our lives. What have you done to us?" The twins remained silent for a long moment. Then, finally, one of them spoke, its words chilling in their simplicity. "We are not from here." The room fell silent. The men exchanged confused glances, not understanding what the twins meant. "We are not of this world," the twin continued. "We are the ones who have watched over this land for centuries. We have seen it all. The rise, the fall. The darkness that lurks in the hearts of men. We are the keepers of this land, and you. The other twin stepped forward, its eyes now glowing faintly, like embers in the dark. You have disturbed the balance, it said, its voice low and ominous. You have taken what was not yours, and now you will suffer the consequences. Samuel felt the blood drain from his face. This was it. This was what he had feared all along. He had come to confront them, to demand answers, but now he realized that the twins weren't just some strange beings from another place. They were something much older, much more powerful than anything he could have imagined. We didn't mean to, Samuel said, his voice faltering. We didn't know. We didn't know any of this. You cannot undo what has been done, the twin said. The land is dying. The animals are vanishing. The people are sick. And all of it is because of your actions. But we didn't, Elias started, but the words caught in his throat. He couldn't finish. The twins had trapped them in this house, surrounded by darkness, surrounded by their power. It was too much to comprehend. What do you want from us? Samuel asked, his voice desperate now. He was trying to make sense of the madness that was unfolding around him, but the more he tried, the less it seemed to make sense. The twins weren't just some strange villagers, they were something else entirely, something beyond human understanding. We want nothing, the first twin said. We merely watch. We observe. We are the guardians of this land. But now, it is your turn to watch. To understand. Without warning, the house seemed to shift. The walls closed in, the air grew heavier, and a strange, haunting sound filled the room. It was like the sound of whispers, but not from any human mouth. The sound came from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the very air itself. The men could barely breathe as the whispers grew louder, the voices a chorus of faint, ancient words. The twins stood perfectly still, their eyes glowing with a strange intensity as the room seemed to warp around them. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. The walls cracked, and a cold wind howled through the room, despite the fact that the windows were shut tight. The room seemed to spin, and Samuel stumbled, his legs weakening under him. Do not fear, the first twin said, its voice echoing like a distant memory. This is only the beginning. With those words, the world around them seemed to shift once more. Time itself felt like it was warping, like it was bending and twisting, becoming something entirely different. And then everything went black. When Samuel opened his eyes, he was no longer in the house. The cold, dark room had vanished, replaced by a vast, endless expanse of nothingness. He stood alone in the middle of the void, surrounded by a silence so complete it felt suffocating. The others were nowhere to be seen. A sudden, gut-wrenching fear clawed at Samuel's chest as he looked around, but there was nothing, just an endless, empty space stretching out in every direction. He couldn't even tell if he was standing or floating. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. Where was he? What was this place? And then, in the distance, he saw something, a faint light, flickering in the vast emptiness. He began to move toward it, his heart pounding, driven by a need to escape the suffocating darkness. But as he got closer, the light shifted, bending and warping in strange ways. The closer he got, the further it seemed to drift. It was like chasing a mirage, always just out of reach. And then, in the middle of the light, he saw them. The twins. Their faces were now distorted, their features twisted in ways that no human face should ever be able to twist. Their eyes glowed brighter now, almost blinding, their bodies shifting as though they were made of smoke, not flesh. Samuel froze. He knew, in that moment, that he wasn't in the real world anymore. This place, the one he had found himself in, was something else entirely. It was a place beyond the physical realm, beyond anything human. He was trapped. The cold was unbearable. The darkness, thicker than the deepest night, pressed in from all sides. Samuel could feel it pressing against his skin, chilling him to the bone, but it wasn't just the cold that terrified him, it was the feeling of being trapped, of being utterly and completely lost. The twins had disappeared from sight, but Samuel knew they were still there, lurking somewhere just beyond the edges of his awareness. He could feel their presence, like an invisible hand wrapped tightly around his chest, squeezing the breath out of him. He took a step forward, his heart hammering in his chest, each footfall seeming to echo louder in the vast emptiness of the void. He was afraid. Terrified, in fact. He had no idea where he was, or how to escape. All he had was the dark, and the haunting sense that something was watching him. Something that wasn't human. As he moved forward, the silence deepened. It was unnatural, like the world had stopped, frozen in time. He reached out, his fingers grazing the air in front of him, as if expecting to touch something, anything. But there was nothing. Nothing but the suffocating void, stretching endlessly in every direction. He tried to call out, but his voice was swallowed by the darkness, as if it had been erased the moment it left his mouth. The only sound was the pounding of his own heartbeat, loud and frantic in his ears. For a moment, he considered the possibility that he was dreaming. Maybe this was all just some twisted nightmare. But the cold, the fear, none of it felt like a dream. It was too real. Too sharp. His mind raced, searching for any explanation, any way out, but all he came up with was nothing. Then, in the distance, he saw it again, the light. Faint at first, like a candle flickering in the dark, but growing stronger with each passing second. It beckoned him forward, like a promise, a glimmer of hope in the all-consuming darkness. His legs moved before he could stop them, carried by an instinct he didn't understand. He needed to reach it. He needed to know what it was. Was it an escape? A way back home? Or was it something else entirely? As he drew closer to the light, he began to hear something. A whisper. It was faint, almost inaudible at first, but it grew louder as he advanced. The words were distorted, broken, like an echo from another world. He strained to hear them, trying to make sense of the strange language that seemed to vibrate through the air. It sounded like a chant, a rhythm, something ancient, something primal. Samuel's skin prickled as he listened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. The light was close now, and with it came a sudden sense of urgency, as though he were being pulled towards something he couldn't fully comprehend. Then, just as he reached the source of the light, everything stopped. The whisper ceased. The light flickered once, then steadied, casting a strange, cold glow around the space. Samuel stood at the center of it, feeling as though the world had tilted on its axis. He was no longer in the void, he was somewhere else entirely. The ground beneath his feet was solid now, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen. The surface was smooth, almost metallic, and beneath his boots, it hummed with an eerie, rhythmic vibration. Around him, towering structures stretched up into the dark sky, their shapes unlike anything he had ever seen before. They weren't like buildings, or trees, or anything that could belong to the earth. They were something alien, something foreign. As he stood there, staring up at the impossible structures, he realized something. It was no longer just a feeling. The twins weren't just watching him. They were here, in this place, and they were waiting. The ground shifted beneath him, and he stumbled, barely catching himself before he fell. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. The world around him seemed to pulse with life, as if the very air itself was alive, breathing with him. Suddenly, the twins appeared in front of him, as though they had materialized from the light itself. They stood. Their faces obscured by shadow, their eyes glowing with an unsettling intensity. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't tell if it was fear or something else, something that felt much deeper, much older. "You've come," one of the twins said, its voice like a whisper in the wind. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, as though they had been expecting him all along. "What is this place?" Samuel demanded, his voice shaky with uncertainty. "Where am I? What is this? What do you want from me?" The twins did not answer right away. Instead, they stepped closer, their eyes never leaving his. There was something in their gaze, something that made him feel both small and insignificant, as though they were watching him from a place he could never reach. You are here because you have lost something, the second twin said, its voice soft, almost soothing. You have lost more than you realize. Samuel frowned, the word stirring something deep within him. He had lost so much. His family. His home. His life as he had known it. But what was it that they meant? Was there something more to his loss? Something he had overlooked? What are you talking about? He asked, his voice breaking. What do you mean by that? You seek answers, the first twin said. But you do not understand what you have uncovered. Samuel stared at the twins, his mind racing. What had he uncovered? He had come to confront them, to find out what they were doing to his village, to his people. But now, standing in this strange place, everything he thought he knew felt wrong, distorted. Why are you doing this? Samuel asked. Why is this happening? What's happening to the village? The village is a reflection, the second twin replied. A reflection of what lies beneath the surface. It is not the land that is dying, Samuel. It is the people. Samuel felt a sharp pang of confusion in his chest. What does that mean? The people are sick. They're dying. They are lost, the first twin interjected, their eyes narrowing. They are no longer what they once were. Their fear has tainted everything. Their darkness is spreading, and they are pulling it with them. Samuel was shaking now, his body trembling under the weight of their words. What were they trying to say? What darkness? What had happened to his village? The people are sick because they have forgotten who they are, the second twin continued. They have lost their connection to the land, to each other. They have embraced the shadows. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Shadows? The people in his village, their fear, their sickness, it had all felt like something deeper, something that couldn't be explained. But now it seemed clear, there was more to it. Much more. You are not the only ones who have been touched by the shadows, the first twin said, stepping closer. They are everywhere. They are in all of you, and in everything around you. The twin raised its hand, and the ground beneath Samuel's feet trembled once again. He stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to steady himself. The twin's eyes glowed even brighter, and the air grew thick with an ominous energy. There is only one way to stop it, the second twin whispered, its voice barely audible in the thick silence. You must face it. Face the darkness within yourself. Samuel's blood ran cold as the words sank in. The darkness within himself? What did they mean? The first twin stepped forward, its eyes locking with his. The land is dying because you are dying. You must confront your fear, your past, your loss. Only then will you be able to save yourself, and save them. The world around him began to shift again. The structure seemed to twist, the light flickering, and Samuel felt himself being pulled away, drawn back into the darkness. Face your darkness, Samuel, the second twin whispered as everything around him vanished. Only then will you find your way home. Samuel's eyes snapped open, and he gasped for air, his lungs aching as though he had been holding his breath for an eternity. The world around him was different. The shadows that had surrounded him just moments ago were gone. Instead, he found himself back in the village, standing in the familiar dirt road that led to his childhood home. But something was wrong. The air was thick, heavy with a sense of impending doom. The sky overhead, usually a bright and clear blue, had taken on a strange, sickly hue, like the sun was struggling to rise. The land seemed to have withered, as though the life that once thrived here had been drained from it. The trees, once lush and green, now stood like twisted skeletons, their bark brittle and cracked. Samuel stumbled forward, his mind racing. The village was the same, yet completely different. It felt like a dream, but one that was distorted and terrifying. His feet carried him through the streets, each step echoing unnervingly in the silence. There were no children playing, no voices calling out. It was as though the village had been abandoned. The sense of desolation was suffocating. As he walked, He could see the faces of the villagers in the windows of their homes, their eyes vacant, lifeless. They didn't even acknowledge his presence. It was as if they were not truly there at all, just shadows of their former selves. Samuel's stomach twisted in knots as he made his way to his house, the one place that still felt like home. When he reached it, he stood there for a moment, staring at the door, unsure of what he would find inside. He hesitated, then pushed the door open. The interior was exactly as he remembered it, familiar and comforting. But even here, something felt off. The once warm, inviting space now seemed cold and unwelcoming. The furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, and the silence was unbearable. "Mom?" Samuel called out, his voice sounding small and weak in the empty room. "Dad?" There was no answer. He moved through the house, calling out for his family, but the only response was the echo of his own voice. The walls, the rooms, everything was silent. His heart began to race, panic seeping in as the realization hit him. His family was gone. Everyone was gone. The twins' words echoed in his mind, "The land is dying because you are dying. You must confront your fear, your past, your loss. Only then will you be able to save yourself, and save them." His hands trembled as he walked into the kitchen. There, on the table, lay a small object, a dark, twisted piece of wood. Samuel recognized it immediately. It was a carving his father had made for him when he was a child. He had always kept it close, a reminder of the love his father had given him. But now, it looked different. It felt different. The dark wood seemed to pulse, as though it were alive. Samuel reached for it, his fingers brushing against its surface. The moment his skin made contact with the wood, a surge of energy shot through him, and his vision blurred. He stumbled back, gasping for breath. The room around him began to distort, the walls warping as if they were melting, and the air grew thick with the same oppressive darkness he had felt before. "No," he shouted, trying to shake off the sensation, but it was no use. The darkness was closing in, swallowing him whole. He tried to move, to run, but his body wouldn't obey. His legs felt heavy, as though they were rooted to the floor. The weight of the darkness was unbearable, pressing down on him, suffocating him. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind raced, searching for a way out. Then, through the chaos, a voice reached him. It was faint at first, but it grew stronger, clearer, until it was all he could hear. "Samuel." It was the voice of the twins. Their voices, now distant, now right beside him, seemed to reverberate through his very bones. "Samuel," they repeated, their voices both soothing and terrifying. "You are the key. You must face the truth. Only then will you be free." The darkness twisted, warping even further. The room began to collapse around him, the walls disintegrating, the floor cracking beneath his feet. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The twins' voices continued to echo, louder now. "It is you, Samuel. You are the one who must confront the shadows. Only then will the village be saved." Samuel's vision blurred, and he felt his body being pulled into the black void. The ground beneath him disappeared, and he found himself falling. Falling into nothingness. His heart was racing, his breath ragged. He didn't know where he was, or what was happening, but one thing was clear, he couldn't escape this nightmare. The twins were right. He had to face the darkness. He had to confront whatever it was that had taken hold of him and his village. The fall seemed to last forever, but then... Suddenly, he was jerked to a stop. The world around him spun, and he found himself standing once again in the middle of the village square. But this time it was different. The sky had darkened completely, and the air felt thick with dread. The villagers were gathered in a circle around a massive stone altar, their faces pale and expressionless. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He knew what this was. He had seen this in his nightmares. In the center of the circle, the twins stood, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. They were no longer the innocent-looking children Samuel had first encountered. Now, they looked like something else, something ancient, something powerful. The villagers stood motionless, their eyes locked on the altar. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as though they were all entranced, caught in some sort of trance, unable to break free. Samuel's legs moved on their own, carrying him toward the center of the circle. He didn't want to go, but he couldn't stop himself. His body felt like it was being pulled toward the altar, toward the twins, as if they were the only thing that mattered in this world. When he reached the altar, the twins turned to face him. Their expressions were unreadable, but their eyes burned with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. "You have come," the first twin said, their voice cold and emotionless. "Now, you must face what lies beneath the surface." Samuel's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You have already seen it," the second twin replied, their voice soft yet chilling. "The darkness is inside you, Samuel. It has always been there." The ground trembled beneath his feet, and Samuel's vision blurred again. The darkness seemed to rise from the earth itself, swirling around him like a living thing. He could feel it, cold, suffocating, endless. It was inside him, just as the twins had said. "You must face it," the first twin urged. "Only then will you be free." Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as the darkness pressed closer, wrapping around him like a suffocating coil. The fear, the anger, the pain he had buried deep inside himself, all of it was rising to the surface. He could feel the weight of his loss, the burden of his guilt, pressing down on him. He didn't want to face it. He didn't want to confront the darkness. But deep down, he knew it was the only way to save the village. The only way to stop whatever it was that had taken hold of them all. As the darkness closed in, Samuel closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It was time. Time to face the truth. Time to confront the shadows. And with that, everything went black. When Samuel opened his eyes, the world around him was still dark. But this time, it wasn't oppressive. It wasn't a void of nothingness, it was quiet. The weight of the darkness was gone, replaced by a silence that felt peaceful, almost sacred. The air was still, the village calm in a way it had never been before. He took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs. It was real. It was solid. He wasn't falling anymore. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't drowning in despair. The darkness had lifted, but in its place, there was a vast emptiness. It was as if something had been removed, something fundamental, and Samuel could feel it in his bones. The world was different now, more peaceful, more connected. He stood up, his legs feeling firm beneath him. He didn't know how he had gotten here, but one thing was certain, the twins were gone. The villagers were gone. Everything that had once been twisted and suffocating seemed to have disappeared. The village itself, in all its eeriness, was now serene. But what had happened? Where were the twins? What had he just faced? The memories flooded back, of the twins' warning, the endless cycle of darkness, the whispers they had left in his mind. The darkness is inside you. You must confront it. But what did that mean? What had he been running from all this time? As he stood in the center of the village square, a faint light began to break through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the land. He squinted, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a sunrise, not exactly, but something more. Something ancient. And then, he heard it. A whisper. Samuel. It was a soft voice, but unmistakable. The voice of the twins. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. There, standing in front of him, were the twins. But they didn't look the same as before. They were no longer menacing, no longer filled with that otherworldly power. Instead, they looked almost human. Their expressions were calm, serene, their eyes clear and unclouded. "We have been waiting for you," the first twin said softly, her voice now gentle, almost nurturing. Samuel opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He was still too confused, still too overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The second twin smiled faintly, sensing his confusion. You have seen the truth, Samuel. You have faced what was inside you. Samuel's stomach tightened. What do you mean? What was inside me? The twins exchanged a glance. The darkness you felt, the first twin explained. It was never truly external. It was never about us, or about the village. It was about you. Samuel swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of their words. I don't understand. I've faced the darkness. I've felt it. But what was it? The darkness is fear, the second twin said, her voice soft and soothing. It is grief, loss, anger, regret. It is the part of you that you hide from. The part you try to bury. It was never about us, Samuel. It was about the pieces of yourself that you refused to see. Samuel's breath caught in his chest as realization dawned. The twins hadn't been tormenting him. They hadn't been trying to hurt him. They had been trying to force him to confront something he had been avoiding for years. I don't know if I can, Samuel whispered, the weight of everything he had experienced settling heavily on his shoulders. The pain, the confusion, the loss, it was all still there, just beneath the surface, waiting to come rushing back. I don't know if I can face all that. You already have, the first twin said with a gentle smile. The darkness is not something to fight. It's something to understand. Only when you accept it, when you accept yourself, your pain, your fears, your regrets, can you move forward. Samuel felt a tremor in his chest, the tears that he had kept locked away threatening to spill over. He had lived with so much pain for so long, tried to ignore the things he had lost, the things he had done, the choices that had shaped him. But the twins were right. He had spent his whole life running from himself, hiding in the shadows of his past. But now he had no choice but to face it all. Is this the lesson? Samuel asked softly, his voice cracking. That I need to accept everything I've lost? Everything I've done? The second twin nodded. Not just what you've lost, but what you've gained, too. The lessons you've learned from your pain. The resilience you've built. You can't have one without the other. The light and the dark exist together, inside every human being. A tear slid down Samuel's cheek, and he wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. But there was no judgment, no mockery, only understanding in the twins' gaze. The village is free, the first twin said. Because you are free. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. But how? How is that possible? The village was cursed. The people were trapped. They were all part of the cycle, the second twin interrupted. Just as you were. They were bound by their own fears, their own regrets, their own darkness. But once you confronted yours, once you let it go, the cycle was broken. The village is free because you are free. Samuel stood there, silent for a moment, trying to take it all in. His chest felt lighter now, like a weight had been lifted from his heart. The fear, the anger, the grief, they were still there, still present, but they didn't define him anymore. He had faced them, acknowledged them, and now he could choose how to move forward. He took a deep breath, a sense of calm washing over him as he looked at the twins. Thank you, he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. Thank you for showing me the truth. The twins nodded, their expressions softening. You were always capable of this, Samuel. You just needed to see it for yourself. Samuel felt a smile tug at the corner of his lips. For the first time in a long time, he felt at peace. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He had faced his demons, and now he could move forward, ready to rebuild his life. The village around him, once shrouded in darkness and fear, now felt alive again. The air was clear, the sun shining brightly above. The people, those who had once been trapped in their own shadows, were now free, able to live without the chains of their past. And Samuel, too, was free. But even as the twins began to fade into the light, their voices lingering in his mind, he understood one final thing: the journey was never truly over. Healing was not a destination, but a process. A choice. And every day, he would have to continue choosing it. Goodbye, he whispered to the twins, watching as they disappeared into the horizon, their figures dissolving into the light. Thank you. As they vanished, a deep sense of peace settled over Samuel. He had faced the darkness. He had faced himself. And in doing so, he had found the strength to carry on. And with that, Samuel walked forward, the village behind him, but the world ahead waiting to be rebuilt. Sometimes, the hardest battles we face are the ones we fight within ourselves. The darkness we carry, the fears, the regrets, the pain, can feel like insurmountable obstacles, but it's only by facing them, by accepting all parts of ourselves, that we can truly heal. The path to freedom isn't about running away from the shadows, it's about learning to live with them, to understand them, and to let go of their power over us. Only then can we move forward, free to embrace the light that follows.